19th, and it is 4:36, and this is a committee of the whole meeting called for the topic of the budget. So I'm gonna take roll right away. So Kelly Eater.
Present.
David Kirby.
Here.
Rosie Lachlan-Kemp is on her way. Jill Lofald, Alana, Amber Sadowski.
Present.
Paul Sandholm.
Present.
Superintendent Vegas.
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Bonds.
Present.
Deputy Clerk Erickson.
Here.
HR Director Severance.
Here.
Board Secretary, Board, we're all here. So I'm gonna turn over our Committee of the Whole meeting to Executive Deputy Clerk Erickson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to meet again before we come forward with the adopted budget for the 2022-23 school year, which will be on the agenda at our next school board meeting. It will run through the business services agenda as a placeholder, so that's where it is placed on the agenda. And it'll just be basically a 2-sentence resolution along with the document that we'll be going over briefly tonight. Just wanted to share with you that there's not a lot of changes from the great 2 first meetings we've had where we've had a lot of discussion, but wanted to just give this final review and kind of walk through some of the highlights of the document and a few of the changes that we saw since May 25th school board committee of the whole. So the first page that you see, there is one change, and that's on the first page. Oh, I'm sorry, just want to make sure everybody has a handout. I'm going to be walking through the handout, so I'm just putting it up here for reference in case people are walking through it. So the last time we had our meeting, the general fund revenues were lowered by approximately $4.4 million to represent the ESSER funds and some of our reserve funds that we'll be using to help balance the budget. So those are now molded in as our final adopted budget. We'll see that in the documentation as we go through. So right now we are projecting a fairly balanced budget. We're just off by less than $2,600 from revenues to expenditures based on the estimates that we know right now. But again, that includes an investment of some of our ESSER $3 and then utilizing some of our reserve fund balances as planned fund balance spending. So we'll talk a little bit more about those. So that's the general fund, and if you remember, our general fund is our largest fund. That includes our general operating, it also includes our transportation, and then it includes all of our capital. So that includes our long-term facilities maintenance, our regular operating capital, and our general maintenance. So that all runs within our general fund. Last meeting, we had some good discussions about some of our other funds, which includes our food service fund. You can see here that we are currently projecting a deficit in our food service. A lot of this is partially due to the unknowns of how we're going to see students coming back. USDA programming is not going to extend as what we know right now, so there will not be free lunches going into the 2022-23 school year. But of course, anything can change. We may hear other things. So we are not sure how a la carte and other food service processes will be reinstated in all of our buildings yet. But we know right now that with the cost of food and some of our issues and concerns with transportation and capacity. Oh, sure, Member Sandholm.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt that.
Oh.
But just, does this take into account some of the inflationary issues we're dealing with?
It does.
It does, okay, thank you.
Yeah. We talked briefly last night in our transportation report at Business Services that in our general fund, one of our areas of concern is fuel costs for our transportation because we are seeing higher than normal fuel costs. And we hope that maybe we'll see some changes, but Simone has worked with Steve Johnson in our transportation department to talk through his budget and where we needed to maybe put a little more line item budgeting to cover those costs.
And we haven't heard anything from the legislature on
Yeah.
these issues which are going to be statewide.
They are statewide issues. It is my understanding, and I know those that are in associations, including MSBA, MASA, and others, we are not hopeful that there's going to be a special session. This is At this time, we're budgeting as if we're not going to be seeing any additional revenues right now in relation to those, but there could, if you remember, when we were in the pandemic, we saw special sessions every month. Maybe if there are specific things they want to handle and tackle, we may see one-off pieces. We also know that this would have been a bonding year for the legislature for mostly cities and other municipalities, and if in the event that they're going to try to move forward a bonding bill, there's also the opportunity they could tag on some other bills or other initiatives. But as of right now, we're budgeting as if we're not going to see any additional revenue. Thank you for that important question. Food service, again, we are projecting, we do have a fund balance. I just want you to know that we do have a fund balance in food service that can cover this current over expenditure. So we're not concerned about it from a fiscal standpoint, but it can't be sustained more than 3 years. So we hope that we'll be able to increase the revenue cost and see some more revenues coming in through food service, but if that's not the case, then we'll have to have some conversations moving forward past this fiscal year on what that would look like moving forward.
And you said that's 3 years, we have 3 years on that?
Yep. Our community service fund, if you remember, community service has many programs inside of it. It has, one of our biggest ones is Head Start. So Head Start actually runs through our community service fund. This is also our general preschool. That includes our school readiness programs as well. BPK, which is a other 4-year-old program, is actually in the general fund and not in the community service fund. So inside of Fund 4 would be our school readiness preschool and our Head Start. This would also include ECFE, early childhood family education, is in our community service fund. And then if you think about all of the other programming that we have through our community programming, so the catalogs that you get, all of the programs and services we provide through community education, just a large piece there. Also in here would be our adult basic education. So Angie Frank, I think, has visited with the board at some of your committee of the whole meetings, and she's doing a great job. She's working through, she's also received some one-time ESSER funds, so she's working on doing some collaboration. That fund is balanced right now, but knowing that too, moving forward, there's going to be some considerations for any advancement of some programming that they may want to do. They'll have to find some sustainable funding to go along with that. So that's what will be inside of the community service fund. You'll also see in community service our key zone. That's another area that, and that's just as a reminder, we approved that contract, and it's a no-cost contract because this is a true partnership with the YMCA. We provide the location and the space, and they provide the staffing, and then we work together to make sure that we can offer those programs both after school, during the school year, and then our summer programming. One of the things that, in related to Key Zone, and I think board members received some feedback from families, is that they are struggling with staffing as well. So we had some limited opportunities in our summer programming and the registration for after school in some of our programming. They are continuing to look at ways to increase their staffing. They have done some wage modifications in order to attract some more people. They've worked with the district. Our goal is always that we break even. That's, we're a service industry, and as long as our expenditures can cover those projected revenues, we've heard from families that maybe there could be a slight modification in the fees to help cover the increased costs. So we've seen families talk about that as well. So I know that the folks at the Y and our community education team have been working together to make sure that we can try to be as robust as we can with that Key Zone program. That program alone generates almost $1 million in revenue and expenditure. So that's another big piece of the community service fund. You're going to see a difference here, or a fund balance drop in community service. This is a planned fund balance drop in multiple programming areas, and they all have fund balances. So again, this isn't something that we're worried about. And again, our hope is that we may see some additional community ed revenues. One of the other sources of revenue for community education is building use. and for the past 2 years, we haven't had a lot of good news. So the fees associated with groups and organizations using our buildings after school day and in the summer would be a revenue stream for community service. So as we're gonna start seeing more activities in our buildings again, those revenues then will increase. But at this time, without knowing what those are gonna be, we didn't wanna over budget there, so we're just showing that difference. But again, we're hopeful that we may see more activities and some more fees coming through for those programs. Any questions on community ed or community service?
I just have a quick question,
Yeah.
because it came up in the food service fund as well. So when we are in deficit, and you say that we don't necessarily have to worry too much about it, because there's a fund balance in those funds, where does that show up in our budgeting, or even in the school board knowing?
Yeah.
If there's fund balances that already have been saved over the years, how
It's in
does
our,
that work?
it's in our audit.
Okay.
So when we present the audit to the board each year, it shows all of our remaining fund balances. I would be happy to send to you before the next school board meeting. We have what's called a compliance table that's from the Department of Education that verifies all of our different fund balances. So I can show you all of those. That's how we run, is that we know we have those fund balances. It shows up in our audit report. If you're excited, you can go into board book and find our version of the audit, and you'll be able to find all those fund balances as well.
So we just don't really see it reflected, because you
Right.
know that this is what the revenues are, you know what this is the expense are.
Correct.
And we might be a little bit in deficit this year, but we know that we've carried over from some better years.
Correct.
Okay.
And sometimes, sometimes it's unexpected and we like that. Other times it's a planned fund balance growth. For example, when we talk about some of the things in the general fund, the long-term facilities maintenance, for example, the timing in which we get the revenue versus when we do projects, because most of that money comes through the levy, we only have one time per year to get that money. But if we don't do the project in the same year we receive the money, it sits in a fund balance and then we spend it the next year. So then that for sure looks way off oftentimes, and we've had some big ticket projects recently. The doors at Ordine and the windows at Congdon were delayed in a fiscal year because we couldn't get them. So they are actually being done now, but we had already received the revenue. So we had a large fund balance, and now that's gonna get spent down because now we're actually doing the project, so.
Thank you. I know you've said this before, and you know,
no,
and now, and I can kind of relate it to your own home budget, you know?
Correct.
I kind of know what I'm gonna spend, but if I didn't spend a lot of clothing allotment last year, I have some fund balance. So I get it.
I think we should all have a clothing allotment. I love that idea. Yeah.
In the area of food service and community ed service, in terms of those fund balances, does the state have a percentage that we are allowed to continue to have as
Yes.
a balance?
So in food service, you're only allowed to carry 3 months operating expenditures in your fund balance for food service. They assess it each year, and if you have too much money in your fund balance, they will make you either lower your food prices or you have to spend down your fund balance. So they do not want you to carry big fund balances in food service because they want you to be able to utilize that for students. So if you make more money than you need, they don't want you to overcharge to be collecting revenues. So that's one area. You can also apply to use some of your food service fund balance for equipment, but you have to ask permission from the department. You generally have to use your operating capital or capital funds to buy equipment, even though it's in the cafeteria. They want you to be able to use that. But if you have excessive fund balances, if you're in deficit, which we're not, our fund balance is not in deficit, both food service and community service are one-way funds, which means you can't take money out of food service and give it to the general fund or community service, but you can give general fund money to both food service and community service to balance those budgets. So general fund has a lot of uses, a lot of sources, but food service and community service, you cannot take extra funds and allocate them back out to another fund. Does that help?
No, that I appreciate that, because I always connect it to also the students' desired daily experiences and our students who express concerns around the quality of our food and
Yes.
the portions of our food.
Have you been
And
talking to my 7th grader?
And when I hear that there's a fund balance, I'm just, it always brings up like,
We
you know,
don't,
could
yeah,
we increase portion size? I know there's FDA rules on that.
yeah.
And or quality of what we do provide.
So that's a great question, and actually I had a great conversation with Sheila Oko a little while back, and might be a great opportunity to invite her to a committee of the whole meeting. I think that because of USDA and because of the requirements that we have, we can't necessarily just give a whole bunch of food. There are requirements because we participate. Several years ago, when I was working with another organization, because of USDA rules and regulations and because of the cost of food, there were districts who were considering dropping out of the USDA and just charging fees for everything, because then they didn't have to follow the rules and they could kind of create whatever program they had. And there, I think at the time, and this was several years ago, there were 2 districts in Minnesota that did do the waiver, but they had so few free and reduced lunch students that it really didn't matter to them. And a district like ours that has over 35% free and reduced lunch, that would be very difficult for families to not have access, because it would basically be giving up the free and reduced lunch model for students. But unfortunately, USDA has a lot of rules and restrictions, and so I'm going to suspect that Sheila will maybe not be the most popular person when she has to tell you all the things we have to do versus all the things that folks would like us to do. But I think it would be a great opportunity, and Sheila would be a fantastic resource.
Thank you.
I would love that. We used to have Campo and fairly regularly. I just wanted to go back to your first thing you said around food service. So we're only allowed to have a fund balance of up to 3 months. Is that
Operating expenditures.
okay, thank you.
I was just gonna add too that it was just on the news, local news last night about the desperate situation our food bank is in. So I would think that the stress is gonna grow and the demand for free and reduced lunches may will in the circumstances.
Yeah, and as we think about just the general cost of food, even though we do bids, you know, we're in the second year of a 2 I don't know if everybody remember, maybe we have some maybe newer board members, but we had done a bid 2 years ago and that bidder defaulted, and we had to basically bring in, and Upper Lakes Foods is fantastic. They
was
have
mid-year.
worked, what was that?
That was mid-year, right?
It was mid-year.
Yeah.
It was actually October. We had just started the school year and all of a sudden they started telling us the truck isn't coming, we're not gonna get you food. We were panicked. I mean, it was crazy. And it was due to labor shortage and their warehouses were out of the Twin Cities and they had a great bid and, you know, for the first month it was okay and they just were not able to sustain that. And so working with Upper Lakes, which had been a bidder in the past, and you know that the rules are we have to take the lowest responsible bid, which brought in a new vendor that year. We also, as their costs escalate, that's part of what the bid is that we also have to be prepared for that. And I'm sure we're all seeing the effects of food costs in the grocery store and others, and we are seeing that same effect as well. So we continue to work really well, and we also get USDA commodities where we get part of our food costs paid for. I don't know, it's sort of emulated where you might hear about the big block of cheese. We don't actually get a big block of cheese, we actually get food, we actually get crates of food, but it turns into, we're able to use commodity money to actually buy food. So, but again, right now costs are outpacing what we had initially hoped for, so we're just keeping a real close eye on that. But I love the idea of having Sheila come, and I think in a future committee of the whole, Anthony, if you could add that on, maybe in September when we're having the start of the school year, that'd be great. Awesome.
Thank you.
The construction fund, I did not put a construction fund budget in, but we're gonna be building one in now that we're actually into construction, into Fund 6 with our $31 million project. So, and as you know, each Business Services Committee meeting, Simone shows a review on our financial report that she provides monthly where we are right now. So we'll be providing that information to you and then moving forward, but the board had already approved that $31 million budget in this school year. So we already have that, and that will be spent out now all the way through most likely midsummer to the end of year of 2023. If you remember, we hope that the major components of the project will be done early second quarter of 2023, but then we'll have obviously some site work, finish up work, and other things. So we may see expenditures going all the way into the summer or beginning of fall of 2023. Also coming up will be the demolition of Central High School. That will be coming forward, and as you know, there's a special board meeting on the 23rd that you've been asked to participate in, which is where we'll be opening the bids for the abatement, the asbestos abatement first. We need to do that as a separate bid. And then in July, we'll be getting the bid for the actual demolition of Central. So there'll be another, we believe that can be a part of the regular school board meeting in July. But Dave Spooner needed this special meeting because we're opening the bids that day. And then he can get the ball rolling as fast as possible to start that work for abatement.
And is that special meeting up here?
It is, right? They just said that without. The debt service fund, big ticket fund, and you see a big negative adjustment there. Not to panic. This is very similar. We have what we call a debt excess penalty or a debt overage, in which we have too much money in our fund balance right now. And the state actually does a yearly calculation, and we are only allowed by statute to carry 5% of our principal and interest payments in our fund balance. Again, this is a fund balance where you should be collecting money and paying money out, and you shouldn't really have a whole lot of money in there. Because we've done several refundings, which have been very beneficial for the district, and because of the timing of our payments from the county and others, if you remember back when the pandemic first started, there was a great concern that people weren't going to pay their property taxes and we were not going to get our payments from property owners, and we had some concern that maybe we weren't going to get our revenues. And it turns out that that was actually not the case. Most people actually did pay their property tax on time, and the county was able to distribute all of our funds. So right now what's happening is the state self-corrects us. So our levy is lower, so our revenues are artificially lower to force us to spend down our excess fund balance. So they do the calculation, they say, hey, I see you have about $1.8 million in your fund balance, so we're only gonna give you $22.9 million instead of the $24.6 million, and we need you to start spending down that fund balance. So this is very common. It happens about every other year. So depending on if a district has refundings, if a district is collecting extra dollars, sometimes they're minor, sometimes they're a little bit larger like this. The bigger the bond payments you have, the more revenue you might see in there. One of the other components about debt service is the Department of Education requires us to levy 5% more than what we need, just in case people don't pay their property taxes. So oftentimes we're collecting more money than we need, so it's very common for our fund balance to grow. So this is not to be alarming, this is not anything unusual, but we'll be spending down a fund balance in order for us to balance out the debt service fund.
And where will we spend that money?
We will be spending that on our general obligation bond payments. Yep.
General obligation
So
bond.
these
So we
are-
can't put it in our general fund?
You cannot.
Oh.
Nope. So
Can't
sorry.
give it to student activity,
You
speech
cannot.
and debate?
No, this is all for, I appreciate the creativity, but no. Debt service is also a one-way fund. Debt service is a restricted fund. It has very, very tight uses and expenditures, so we are not able to use these funds. We are just relieving debt. So the general obligation bonds, yep, that we're paying off, yep. And if you remember, all the refundings that we did ended up helping us save some money, but we restructured some of our payments too. So this past year, the levy we did a year ago is what's for this year. So some of the changes we did in the fall and the spring won't be reflective until a year from now.
So last year, because I always compare.
Yeah.
You know how I am. So last year, it was $500,000 was.
Yep.
And then this year, because we collected that money.
Yep. We have more money, we collected more debt service revenue than we needed, which was the result of refundings and the result of the 105% over levy that we're required to do. It made us grow our fund balance.
And then that growth in the fund balance, we're gonna use to pay down our bonds,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
So,
Basically, there's an extra checkbook for the year, which is that fund balance, and the state of Minnesota or the property tax owners are not levied as much as we need. because we have the money already in our bank account.
For
For just debt, for this coming
just
school
for
year.
this coming school
Correct.
year.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you, Kathy.
They do the recalc every year, that's why you see a different amount every year, and there may be years where there's very little, because we can keep within that 5% threshold of what our annual debt service is, but after that, they do the calc. Yep.
So did that affect this year's property taxes or next year's property?
It is the calculated 2022, the year we're in right now, calendar year 22 for fiscal year 23. So we're already collecting. Any other questions on debt service? It's one of my favorite funds. Our trust fund is a very small fund. This is where we set aside some federal revenues. This is something that Duluth Public Schools did well before I got here. We use it to pay off health benefits for federally funded programs. So money comes in and money goes out. It basically just kind of carries over itself in that fund. Our internal service fund is our dental. We are self-insured for dental insurance. And again, the goal here is to generate revenue to cover the costs that we get from our dental insurance premiums. And the district provides some level of dental insurance, but employees are also offered the ability to carry a higher level of dental insurance. And then we do a rate review to make sure that we're not over asking for that, because again, our intention here is not to make money on dental insurance, it's to be able to maintain our dental insurance program. Does that make sense for folks? And I'm trying to remember, did we do a review yet? In October. We were doing it in October. So we'll be able to get a review, so that'll be for next school year if there's gonna be any adjustments. So right now, the same rates apply for this coming school year as they did last year. And that's just shy of $1 million, or approximately $924,000 that we invest each year in our dental insurance. Our student activity funds, we have kept this as a set aside just to show as an example, but remember, student activity accounts are rolled into our general fund. But because we have such a high amount and there's been some transition to rolling that all into our general fund, we're just showing that as a separate line item right now. But again, Simone and her team have spent the past year putting all of those accounts into our general fund. We have new codes in our systems. They have worked with all of our buildings, all of our building leaders, all of our clericals to make sure that they understand that it's the same system, the same money, it goes into the same accounts. There wasn't any transfer or giving them away to other people, but we had to put them into our general fund where we were using a separate software system at the local site levels, and the state said, no more, you need to roll that into your general fund. Yep.
So are we at a place yet, Simone or CFO, where the debate team, the football team, the hockey team, they know what they have in their accounts?
Yes.
I mean, if the activity director gets asked that question from the coach, the activity leader, you can give them that answer.
Absolutely. Every clerical or principal has access to that Skyward, and they can go in and, as long as they have the correct code, and they can ask me for it if they need
So the
help.
activity directors have it, the
Absolutely.
principals actually have access to
Yes.
it too,
Yes, they
or they
do.
can get in contact.
Yes.
And just so you know, one of the things we did do that Duluth Public Schools was not doing is that we coded separately all of our individual sports and activities, which before they were all rolled into one giant code and they were kept track of individually on separate sheets. We built codes in our Skyward system so that you can see hockey, you can see basketball, you can see lacrosse. This was a lot of work done by our finance team and folks in that department, because we wanted to be able to have a report that you could go into, a principal, the athletic director, activities director, or even the person in charge, the supervisor or coordinator, they could go in and see those and where those amounts are. So it was a lot of work. I think Simone spent the better part of a year this past year, since last April, doing all that
But
work.
we had to do this. I mean, the
We
state
had-
required us to
we
do this,
had
to
to
get
do
rid of the old
it.
system and to get a
Yep.
better, more
Yeah.
managed and transparent system.
Yeah, the individual reporting was really important. That's not necessarily a requirement, that's a local thing. We created our own set of codes to identify those, but that's what just about every other school district does. So now we're in better alignment with what other school districts do. And then we can also go out and ask for comparisons, so that oftentimes you'll see regionally someone saying, well, how much do you spend on track? And then how much do you spend on track? So in the past, we weren't really able to do that because the system we used was all kind of dumped into one big fund. Now Simone would be able to look up that information and find that out.
So if the speech and debate team packages bags groceries that cover food, and then they turn the money into who? The activities director?
Simone.
To Simone. Did you bring that right to Simone, and then it's going into your account?
Well, it goes, I think, at least at Denville, they have a executive secretary to the activities director. And I bring it right to the building I'm coaching at.
They have deposit slips that they can go to the bank, but they have to submit all of the data back to the finance department,
Right,
so, yeah.
And that's how it's working today?
Yep.
This summer for these activities, I mean, the summer's a big time
You
for
bet.
those kind of grocery bagging and other fundraising and sales activities.
Yes.
I can attest that it's probably been a lot of work for our crew to do that, and it's been a learning curve for coaches. Because I think the communication between our finance and our school buildings is great. Our school buildings, working with the coaches that directly kind of look at that budget is there now. But it took some time. And they're all, I really just worked with Simone a little bit because of the medical issues going on with our secretary at Denville. So they really are open to it. I just hate to bother anybody because they're all overworking, but
Just ask.
I've got codes. I know my codes. I know where my money is. I know that I bagged groceries and I got the money. Didn't go anywhere else. Didn't go to my son's football program. Even though the low fault name.
Well, I know, they get the names mixed up, and then next thing you know, you're buying
I
helmets
know.
for the team,
I know.
or the debate team shows up with football helmets.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But thank you for that work. I was kind of wondering, well, my goodness, it's managed right down to the 256, but it's because generally it's probably in the general fund.
Correct, and the way we budget is that no student activity is allowed to overspend. So no student activity can go into the negative. They must have receipts or a balance in order for them to spend money. So the reason we show this as a balanced fund is we may spend 900,000, we may spend 1.5 million depending on the group or activity or how they fundraise. But in this case, they're not allowed to overspend. But we have a little over $1 million in our fund balances. So collectively, if you think about all our buildings, and remember, elementary buildings also have activity funds that they're carrying too. So we have 13 traditional buildings that are carrying balances because maybe they're waiting a couple of years and they're going to do a bigger event. We have a lot of times they're going on field trips or doing other collections. And so we do have, quite a bit of money, but again, that's part of that transparency that we wanted to have so that everyone can see that each year Simone will share with every department what they have left over. They get a revenue budget, they get an expenditure budget, but we're also tracking all of those individual fund balances so every group knows how much money they have. When we went through this process, each individual building principal noticed that we had some dormant accounts where there had been years of fund balances but no activity, and actually in some cases there was no explanation of what it was actually for. So the building principal and Simone worked together to kind of make a general activity account so those funds got moved in. We collapsed a couple accounts in some of our areas, and that's being managed by the building principal if it's an elementary school, or the activities director if it's at the secondary schools.
Maybe this wasn't mentioned already, but so the activity fees that students pay to participate in different things, that goes into like the East account, the Denville, or does it all go?
So it is deposited in those accounts, but keep in mind that none of our programs are self-sustaining except for the ones that we have agreed to, such as lacrosse at East, which has been a contracted, an outside entity has agreed to fully fund lacrosse, so they do all of the fundraising to make sure that happens. The school district spends well over $2 million a year of the general fund to subsidize all of our activities. So while they're being put in those accounts and being identified there, it's really part of the general fund and not as part of student activities. Does that make sense? Yep, that's a great question. And we are working to restructure how costs are associated, because under the old way where all of the revenues were kind of kept and deposited at the sites versus being brought up to the district level, which is what we're required to do now, there were agreements that the activities director would pay for referees out of the fee dollars, and then there was all these separate accounts, and it was very hard to track and manage. So now we're streamlining all of that so that every department, every activity has all of its revenue, all of its expenditures identified and recognized, so we know how we're paying those off. Did you want to follow up?
Well, I was just curious about how, if we're subsidizing our activities across the board, $2 to $2 million. I'm guessing other districts do something similar, or maybe even subsidize it even at a higher.
Absolutely, 100%. There are districts who don't charge activity fees.
Right.
There are many districts who utilize their general fund as a component piece of their extracurricular or activity budgets. Others do a percentage. They look at the total cost and then work their way backwards for basically a local share versus a supply share. And again, when we get, oftentimes too, activities and extracurricular activities are also the source of a lot of donations. So oftentimes we see those programs being subsidized by outside sources or local businesses who want to provide support to some of those activities. So it's a little complicated, but we're putting together, I think, a great structure in Skyward so that when we want to have conversations both at the local site level or here at the board level, that we'll be able to have now really good reports where we can show all that. So I hope that, and maybe Emily, in a future meeting, we could have a more informative conversation about how Simone could share how we do our activity budgets. Maybe in like November, after the audit is over.
Yeah.
I know it's June and we're getting ready to this, but we're already in preparation for audit. So this becomes a really busy time for our finance team. So once they get all of their work done, I know they'd love to have a conversation with all of you, so.
Can you further clarify?
And I don't want to go down the hole too much here, but the activities fees, I'd be curious to know how many we do like a scholarship for,
Sure.
For financial hardship.
Yeah, we do have a policy related to free and reduced lunch, and we can, and I will say the activities directors do a lot of that work, and it might be helpful if Tom and Sean come to, and maybe we could collectively put something together. That would be great. Did you have a follow-up?
I want you to, if you could clarify, so every team, for example, so every team after that, let's stick with teams. So the sports team may receive a certain amount of resources from the general fund. That's right. So that's, and then teams can do other activities to also add to their overall activities fund. Correct?
So part of what we need to do as part of the evolution of activities and extracurricular, including our athletic teams, is that as we've now moved all of our funds into the general fund, we're recognizing, especially during the pandemic, that we have some sports in some areas that did not generate enough revenue to cover the cost. And right now, we are using general fund dollars to make sure that all those fixed costs for coaching, officials, and transportation, and on many levels, some general equipment and general supplies are covered. But in the past, the activities directors, because they kept all of the fees at a local level, they were the ones who kind of moved the pendulum and maybe collected other dollars and asked to do fundraisers. Now we're in a more collective role because that's what the state is requiring of us now. And so now we really need to work together because we do, and I know Chair Lofald gave a great example of doing plays, for example. You could do an identical play at both of our high schools, and maybe one high school is going to generate more ticket sales than the other. And so we may have we might have an equity issue in terms of, would we require that other building to spend less because they know they're not gonna get as much proceeds? Or do we wanna run the same program even though we know we're not maybe gonna get the same amount of revenue because we don't have the same population? So those are some of the things, bigger questions that we need to work through right now. But for the most part, I do wanna say that our activities directors have done a really great job of just trying to manage. And as you know, during the pandemic, we did pay all of our coaches when we weren't receiving any revenues because we didn't have athletics and activities. And we realized that it's such an important component piece of what we do as a school district, even though it's not a really large fee structure in our buildings. But we are gonna have to talk about, as we keep moving forward, how we wanna make sure that we're keeping up with additional costs and how those move forward. And so we'll look forward to Simone and the athletic directors, activities directors, to have some really great conversations.
Thank you.
Any other questions on? So in summary, this is our budget, which you can see is toppling over the $150 million mark with all of our funds being now put together. And then you're gonna see in the next several pages the same documentation that we've seen for the past several meetings that we've had. And again, I'm just gonna briefly highlight some things and then I'm gonna kind of get to the end where we're gonna talk about ESSER, because I really think it's important for all of you to understand how ESSER is being embedded and some of the additional things that we're gonna be doing for the next school year and related to those ESSER/ARP funds. So again, I just wanted to have a reminder of, in our general fund, that initial 113 million without ESSER funds being infused in here, the majority of our dollars come from state sources. And the majority of our state sources are that per pupil funding or general education revenue that comes into play here. Also, yeah.
So comparing from last year, and this probably has to do with ESSER funding, but from the federal government last year, we got about 8.6, and this year we're at about 5.7. Is that
Yes,
the
it has
ESSER?
to do with that we had put in those first ESSER funds. What happens with ESSER is we don't get the money in advance, we get it as a reimbursement, so we're not budgeting it until we actually expend it. So that's how we're working, but we're gonna show that, all that summary through
And then
ESSER.
will that number become adjusted for FY23, that
Correct.
5.7 million?
Yes, yep, so when you see fiscal year 22, we've received over $8 million this year, and it's gonna be even more, because we've now requested, because we've spent close to $10 million this school year with ESSER funds. So we have done draws, we've asked the state to reimburse us, so you'll see that as an adjusted budget as we've now expected those. And you've been seeing that in our monthly budget reports as budget changes.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's how you relate those changes back to this $8.5 million, is those budget changes that we've looked at
Every month, that business,
every month?
yes.
Okay. Connecting the dots.
Sybil,
Yeah.
where is this, do we have a copy of this slide?
Yep, right, it's next page. And it's back to back.
I didn't see it.
Maybe yours.
Does it say 113?
Oh, okay, got it, okay.
Like, did I give a surprise budget book to someone? So again, just a reminder that right now, the largest component is state. When we think of local, remember this is our property tax. So one of our biggest chunks of local would be our local property tax. We have about a $40 million levy, but a big chunk of that, over 16 million, is in debt service. So that's not all running into our general fund. So the other half, or other little less than 2/3, is what we have in our general fund. Also under local would be our fees that we charge, donations that come in, grants that we get. But for the most part, that largest piece of local would be our levy limitation certification or property taxes. So any questions on revenues on the pie? The other thing I wanted to remind folks about is that we are projecting right now this fiscal year 23 budget, we're still utilizing a pupil count of 7,985 adjusted ADM. We've had some conversations. Last year we were more aggressive than we had hoped. We had budgeted 8180 if you look at last year. We asked the board to revise that back in February to 8,005. We just saw last night at our business services, we're just shy of like 7,999.
Something, yeah.
So we're right in the ballpark of where our new estimates are gonna be. But again, even though we are seeing some re-enrollments, keep in mind, this is about budgeting and revenues, not necessarily about class sizes and where we're gonna put kids. And we just felt at this point that we wanted to be, I think, slightly conservative, and we hope that that number might be 8,050 or maybe 8,100. But at this time, we feel it's better to be conservative, and then as the school year starts, and if we feel like we have more re-enrollment, the budget can be adjusted and we can increase our revenues, which may mean that we look at other initiatives and maybe we buy better chicken tenders. We can find areas in which we could have those discussions. But again, at this time, we really just feel pretty comfortable with that, and I hope the board understands why we might want to be slightly conservative here.
What did we end this year at?
70, this current year, we're at 79.99, but again, this is not final. We have about 6 more months of reporting before we can get to our final number. We don't actually find out how many students we had for last year until December of this year, because we're still interchanging revenue or information with all of the other districts who have our kids, and then all of the districts that we have kids from. So we have to keep transmitting information, and we're battling out who gets the ADM for all these kids, especially if you've enjoyed any of our business services meetings and the spreadsheets that Cattery does every month. You can see the number of enrollments we have, which is usually that first column, versus how many kids we have. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure we've had over 13,000 or 14,000 enrollments. Every time a student leaves or comes, it generates a new enrollment. So we have almost double the amount of kids coming in and out of the district, which creates a new record versus how many kids we get paid for. So there's a lot of activity, and that means that if they're not here, they're most likely someplace else. And if our records don't match, neither district gets paid until we get them fixed. So that's an important, that MARS role, that MARS position is super critical in relation to revenue.
And so this projected 7,985, that's, we have our kindergarten numbers and we're looked at those and we see
Yep.
that those are, okay.
We are seeing a little bit of bump up in kindergarten. We believe that there were some families who didn't enroll their students this year that could have been in kindergarten this past year, and now we're seeing a slight bumper crop of kindergartners. This happens maybe once every 5 or 6 years. And so we are seeing a slightly larger kindergartners.
I like that phrase, bumper crop of kindergartners.
It's kind of cute. We love kindergartners.
We do, bumper crop.
I'm gonna scroll to the next page, which again, we've talked about this 2 different times, so unless anyone has any questions, this just kind of breaks down the different pieces. I'll make one comment again related to the basic skills under restricted and reserved. That includes our compensatory revenue, and this is just a reminder that again, we are seeing about a $300,000 loss in compensatory going into fiscal year 23. But in this current year, we saw a loss of over 1.4 million. So our compensatory revenue is way down from where we used to be. So that's why it's so important that we're using those ESSER funds to backfill. Because without those funds, we'd be seeing some of our buildings and programs probably needing to do reductions. And as our administrative team knows, this is going to be one of the biggest discussions this district's going to have throughout this year as we're phasing out of ESSER funds. If we do not see recapturing of enrollment or a law change that will replenish compensatory, we're probably going to have some reductions that are going to have to come that way, because we're working on a budget that I think when I came to the district was over $7 million, and now we're down to 5.2. So that's a big loss for the district over the past 4 years.
So is that a compounding effect right now in terms of $1 million something last year, now 300,000 this year, or has it shrunk because we have more kids back in?
No, so we're spending as if we have $6.6 million, and now we have 5.2, and then it's going to go down to 4.9. Yeah.
I'm just looking at my notes from our May meeting, and when we were talking about federal programs, I think you were gonna get us a list of the federal programs.
You are right.
I just have a note here. So-
I will send that out by
Okay.
email so you can have
Great,
that before.
thank you.
We have a great listing of a lot of federal programs. And I would consider those our regular programming versus the ESSER, which is also a federal component piece, but we have several within that. Thank you for the reminder. And Simone, if you can remind me.
Writing it down right
Thank you. So again, these are just kind of our general overview, and also just our revenue comparison. We are seeing a bump up in our revenues without ESSER. Again, we're considering this kind of not before ESSER funds, and the biggest piece of additional revenue for us is from LTFM. So we're getting an LTFM payment on our levy for projects that weren't done yet. So this is just sinking of that LTFM, so it can't be used on other things because it's going into a special reserve. We also believe we're gonna see a slight increase in our special education revenue, but if you remember, our revenue is only about 56% of our expenditures, so we still are using a lot of our general fund to help subsidize our special education, and that's that magic cross subsidy that we hear about and talk about. So, and then we also, for this current year budget, you know, we had lost some general education revenue because we thought we were gonna have more, we had budgeted more pupils than we had, and then again, there's that predicted loss of compensatory revenue.
CFO Erickson, I was just looking at, so for our fiscal year 22, our restricted budget that we had for our area learning center was about 1.4 million, and this year it looks at 1.25 million.
They are one of the largest losers of compensatory revenue.
That's
They're
what it
actually losing $500,000, and they have less students enrolled, so we had to go down slightly from where they are right now. But they're within their budgeted range, and ESSER will be backfilling ALC to make sure that that's covered.
So this loss is due to the decrease in compensatory
And the decrease in pupils.
and the okay.
But we're backfilling with ESSER funds.
Sure, yeah.
Yep.
I just helps me.
On the next page, you'll see again here, just a reminder of our expenditures. We've gone from revenues to expenditures. And again, where do we spend the majority of our general fund dollars? Those would be in that elementary and secondary area, and the majority of that is our teaching staff, so salaries and wages. And looking at the other component piece, and we've had this conversation several times, is in relation to special education instruction. And again, that yellow bar, that is some big costs. We get about $14 million in revenue, and we're spending about $26 million in expenditures in special education. And again, we continue to see great need in special education. I know you've heard from Director Jason Crane and others on what those needs that we're seeing within our district. I think we shared with you in a prior meeting that even with the large unenrollment that we had over the past 2 years, if you remember in fiscal year 20, we had over 8,360 students. We went down all the way to 7985 in this past year at the end of fiscal year 21. We have more special education students now than we did prior to the pandemic. So even though we've had a loss of enrollment, we have had more students qualify for special education than we have the enrollment. So just wanted to make people aware that we are seeing more students qualifying, and that always relates to higher cost in relation to being able to provide those services. So again, you can see that we have about $118 million projected for this school year. And then one of the areas, and we talk about that, I have some notes in here that we also built in, we're in the process of finalizing most of our negotiations. So now that we have contract settlements, we're building in those costs as well. So we know that the majority of our larger contracts have been settled. So we're rolling those in, and then as I've shared in several of our other meetings, our health insurance increase was approximately 6%, which equated to a little over $1 million for the district to have to budget into 2023 to help cover those costs. Any questions on just the general? I know we've talked about these in our first 2 meetings as well. I also want to just invite you all, if you have any questions that you haven't thought of now, but you might be taking this home and putting it under your pillow and thinking about your budget for the next week, please email me, give me a call. I'm available this weekend. I know the board meeting's next Tuesday, but I'd be happy to walk through any questions you might have related to the budget so that, you feel comfortable. And also keeping in mind that this is a living document. We're giving an adopted budget of the best things we know right now, but every month Simone goes through and we have to make adjustments and we ask the board to change things as we find out more information and we present that each month. So this is the best we know of as today, but we'll continue to work through those budget pieces, and if we see more and better information, we will provide that to you and then ask you to consider making those budget changes that we do each month.
Superintendent?
Speaking of board meetings next week, I know there was a statement related to the special board meeting we're gonna have on the 23rd.
Yes.
I have it on my calendar as 4 o'clock, but there's, I think, is it 4 or 4:30?
Boy, I'm not sure.
I just want to make sure if there was an email.
Dave Spooner was working with Patty,
It's
so.
not
It's not
on
on
We
our
didn't
calendar
calendar,
that
so it
Patty
just
just
kind of,
sent.
I think, took us all by surprise, so.
Sorry.
I've seen it somewhere.
Oh,
It's not
yeah,
on the calendar that Patty just
Patty
sends out
says
as
it's
a
a weekly
corrected
calendar.
okay,
And we-
we'll make sure
and I
that
can
gets
check
added,
that.
because I think they, I'm sorry, yeah, this was an important one that we needed for
Oh,
the
it's next Thursday?
next Thursday,
Yeah,
and
4 or 4:30.
yeah,
I'm not gonna be,
so we've gotta make sure we have 4 people. This is just to approve the opening of the abatement bid. That's the only thing on the agenda, it should
And
last.
we're not able to do it in coordination with our board
Because
meeting.
the bid's
No,
closed.
the bid doesn't open until the 23rd.
we
So
have
it's
to-
next Thursday, at what time?
I'll
I
have,
think 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock is probably right, or it could be 4:30 if that makes it easier for people.
Form would be easier for me, I'm looking at something.
And like you
Yeah.
said, you don't believe it's gonna be
It's
an extensive meeting.
It'll be a 5-minute meeting. We're opening the bid, we're needing to accept the bid because we have to work with the state of Minnesota to be able to start the abatement process.
That's why you cut us all like digging in our calendar.
I-
You said that day, so I was trying to figure out where did that come from?
I apologize, I know Dave was working directly with Patty, so I didn't, I guess I hadn't expected that it
We
wasn't.
can just double,
I believe I could be there.
I could be there at 4 or 4:30. I just-
Awesome.
here.
Yeah, it would just be
I'm
here.
gonna be in the cities.
Okay, and we could check to see if we could put you in remotely if we needed a 4th person. But if there's 4 people and we have a quorum, that's
How
all
about
we
the
need
rest
to.
of you guys?
I get done with the meeting right at 4, so it takes me 5 minutes to get over here.
Perfect.
Can we say 4:30 then? Or no?
We probably can.
I can probably do 4:30.
I'll have Patty coordinate with everybody. I didn't realize there hadn't been a
Perfect.
fixed
right,
time,
I'm
so
checking
we'll,
with Patty now. And
I'll just put in for remote if I can,
thank you.
if I can.
Yep, that'd be awesome.
I have an event at 5 that I have to participate in, but I will, it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes.
4:15?
Yep.
Oh,
I think we might be done in 10 minutes.
Yeah, oh, I know.
Members, the majority of the rest of the packet are all things we've reviewed, going through the revenues and expenditures of all of our different funds. What I'd really like to do is scroll all the way to the last page. And I'm sorry it's sideways on the screen, but this was the ESSER documentation that we talked about in our first meeting. So it's all the way on the back, and it's landscape, so it's kind of crooked here. But we had some great initial conversation at our first meeting in May, and I'm trying to remember if everybody was here for that meeting, and maybe Member Eater. This will be very exciting for you. But we talked a lot about the dollars that we've spent, the ESSER funds that we have expended, and this is just related to FY22 and FY23. We have been spending ESSER or ARP funds since March of 2020. So we've already spent what we called ESSER 1, we already spent CRF funds, and we barely tagged into some of the ESSER 2 in our fiscal 20 year and 21, fiscal year 21 years. And now we're starting to tap into and finalizing ESSER 2 and tapping into ESSER 3, which is that larger third allocation that we received. that was approximately $20 million, of which 20% had to be set aside for after the school day or after the school year, or with a special application process, it could be embedded into a school day. We initially applied for after the school day, after the school year. We were notified by the Department of Education that we could amend our application to include a in-school day programming, and Assistant Superintendent Bonds has been leading that work. So he has that budget that he's been working on, and I think we might have meetings in the next day or two. I might have seen something on my calendar. And so we'll be managing that approximately $4 million. We call it ESSER 161 in Simone and my world, because all of these allocations have coding systems to it, so that's how we recognize some of those funds. So I just wanted folks to be aware that that is moving forward. Assistant Superintendent Bonds has a team of people that have been working on what those are going to look like, and I believe, and Assistant Superintendent Bonds can speak to this, it is going to have all three components: after the school day, after the school year, and embedding some of those dollars into the school year for next year.
That's correct.
And possibly the following
And
year.
the following year.
Yeah, so remember, these funds can be spent until September 2024. So we have this coming year to spend and into 23, and then also into the fall of 24. So he does have 2 fiscal years to spend those dollars. So he'll be working on providing an amended budget to that once that all gets finalized.
Correct, and I'll make sure that I provide a update to the board, presentation to the board on how we're utilizing those dollars. So,
And then, Stifo Erickson, so I'm just, again, looking at when we had that first conversation, or not the first, but the updated conversation on it. And this chart, in the chart now we have, is there anything different?
The only thing different that I did was highlight in yellow.
Yeah, I was like, okay, why is that highlighted? I'm not seeing any numbers changing.
And why I did that was because that's for this budget year. So we recognize that there was a 22 budget that we're in right now, but those 3 columns all need to be added together, which equate to the 11.839 million that we are proposing to spend in fiscal year 23, which does not include the out of school day, out of school year that Assistant Superintendent Bonds will share with you. So that you see that little box in the bottom left-hand corner that says the district must also use $4 million. That is not in here, but that will also be developed, and then we'll build that in as he decides how that's going to get spent out. And we'll show the 23 value and then the 24 value separately. So this will just be what will be associated with the 23 school year. We'll add that as an amended piece of our budget once that gets determined.
And Assistant Superintendent Bonds, when do you project that we'll have some information on this?
I can provide an initial update at the next COW meeting.
Oh, okay. I was thinking months, so,
No.
okay.
Oh,
Great.
they're
We've been
going
working on
crazy.
it.
Yeah, they're working.
It doesn't take long to,
Spend money.
Yeah, way to go.
but we're doing so thoughtfully too. There's a theory of change model where we have to propose what we're spending, how we're spending it, and how it's gonna pay off and result in academic and social emotional results for our students. And I think you'll be pleased with how we're looking at allocating funds.
So when you think about the budget we're proposing, which is the 118 million, that's our general fund plus all of the other funds. These $11.8 million is on top of that. So we'll be investing another $11 million on top of the first page summary. So that's why we have this included in here, and this is the same thing we did last year, was we approved the operational fund as if we didn't have ESSER, and then we asked you to approve this page as the additional supplemental expenditures that we'll be having. And again, I know we spent quite a bit of time at our first meeting kind of talking through each of the line item areas, but again, I would welcome any questions if you have any related to the different initiatives. And just as a reminder, on that third column, we did recognize that when we did fiscal year 22 budgeting and allocations, we had some areas that were not spent. And we had recognized through some of our work as an administrative team that we had about $1.8 million that we could redistribute. And we did a administrative team workshop where we asked our building administrators, our other departmental administrators, what were those priorities that they saw for redistribution of these funds? We did an exercise where each person kind of, if they could build the budget, what were the things that they could do? And we used those trends and that information to build what those priorities were. And that's what got us to extending elementary interventionists, some additional secondary FTE at both Denfeld and East to make sure that those extra supports that they needed were covered. We did make sure there was a little bit of extra revenue for middle school interventionists. We saw that that was an important piece. And then the secondary counselors, we saw that that was a continued need, so we invested some of those dollars. And then we just had like a little pot that was just there for reallocation as the administrative team saw as needed. So just wanted to remind you that those dollars were from fiscal year 22 that we had budgeted, but we knew were most likely not going to get spent. And that was a really collaborative work effort, I think, between the superintendent and assistant superintendent kind of sharing through that work with our whole team. And even though it was remote, it was a very good meeting, and everybody had an opportunity to provide input before those decisions were made.
Just a question on our temporary district-wide floating subs. I know we've decided that that's not the direction the budget's going for the next year, but are we going to continue paying our substitutes at the rate we increased it this year?
So right now, that was a change in our fee structure, and that was approved by the board. So unless the board changes that again, we would be at the $150 for the next school year. So that was a permanent change. Member Sandel?
I'm gonna follow up on the floating sub question.
Just $150
Per day.
Okay.
I'm just curious how you would interpret how successful that was, or how helpful that was. We're choosing not to continue on with it, and maybe there's good reason for that, so just.
No, I think it was very successful, particularly during the significant staffing shortages that we had. And I think that we looked, it's hard to look into the pandemic crystal ball to see where we'll be at for sure. And I think it's important for us to recognize if we have a need for floating subs, we would look to add back there to some degree. But at this point, we're not forecasting that we're gonna need those subs in the same way. And because of the the unfinished learning needs of the students related to mental health and academics, we're placing more emphasis there for now. But I agree we have to keep that. The need for subs is paramount. And if you go into Teresa's office, basically it says like para hiring and sub hiring. Those are her two main ever-present goals, and she feels confident that we will have a more robust pool of subs in the fall. They're doing we're doing some pretty innovative things with recruiting right now too, where just as an example, we're looking at doing a wrap of one of the city buses with hiring information. We're going to the Juneteenth celebrations and having booths there, so we're doing a lot more when it comes to recruiting. But I share, I think having all subbed ourselves, I think we share the concern. We have to make sure we have subs in place.
And I would just add, Member Eder and I, who serve on the Quality Steering Committee, we did have a discussion about the floatings. We asked for feedback and that, so there was a discussion with kind of a broader audience on it as well from our teaching staff.
The principals had some input on this.
Absolutely.
Yes.
When we did the final of what those cost allocations were, floating subs were one of the things they could choose, and that did not rise to the level of the top 4 or 5 things that we chose. They really saw intervention being the number one reason that we should reinvest our funds in.
But the floating subs were close, but not there, and because of the unfortunately, and I think the biggest message of all that we talk about is that we don't have unlimited ESSER funds that are going to last forever, and we only have a little bit left. And so trying to make sure that we're very, very careful about what we have left and putting it towards the greatest need. But having a high quality classroom teacher when somebody is out ill is a very high need too. So I think we have to we're definitely making sub-recruiting a big part of our work over the course of the next months and year. But as far as the floating subs for the moment, we aren't able to fund those.
I guess I'm just gonna add, I kind of want to be careful how I say this or whatever, but the economy being what it was, I think if we can make our subs feel safe coming back, I think we may see some, because of the situation that exists out there for a lot of retired teachers and or individuals that have subbed in the past, but maybe stepped away for a time.
True.
They may be looking to come back if they feel like they can come back safely. If they feel like they can wear a mask in the building and sub and not be ridiculed for it or
It's a really good point.
We'll gladly take in a bit.
One other quick question. My questions are always quick. This one's for Assistant Superintendent Pons. I'm just, that $4 million that you're using for those wraparound services,
Yes.
are you, and I know the answer is yes, but I just want to hear it publicly for everybody to, is when our data came out for testing for all of our students, especially our BIPOC students, we saw that their reading levels at the third and the fifth and all those grades had sunk significantly. So is a lot of this money being used to sort of wrap around for those students and really try to catch them up?
Yes, and socio-emotional.
And the social emotional piece too?
Correct, because that's, those are obviously the two biggest areas that we saw of greatest concern. Like CFO said, we have 3 areas you can spend the money: before and after school programming, summer school, and then now we have the ability to do some during the school day opportunity. So right now, I'll give you a preview of the meeting, of next month, is a significant portion of the resource dollars will focus on during the school day added support to focus on positive behavioral, climate, culture, having support staff in the building whose role is to really shore up systems where we are getting ahead of stream on behaviors by focusing on creating a great climate for our students and staff, right? So we're hoping that by focusing on the positive behaviors and restorative practices, that there will be a reduction in behaviors and school suspensions and so forth. So we're spending we plan to spend significant resources on SEL. And we do have 2 other areas where we're spending on academics and enrichment. So before school and after school, we still have monies set aside for that, and we also have monies set aside for summer school. The challenge is, even this year, staffing.
Yes.
So we have the students, but we don't have necessarily the staff that, who are wanting to take on summer school. And for obvious reasons, individuals are, that's not what they want to do, and then individuals are also tired and they want an opportunity to reset. So they want to work on their social and emotional needs and recharge. So we don't have the staffing level to support the enrichment opportunities we could provide to students. So we also are thinking about partnerships, community partners for the summer, expanding contracts with them potentially, or adding new partners to opportunities for students during the summer, as well as before and after school as well. So we would love to focus on the academics and enrichments, but that before school, after school, and summer, it's a challenge because of staffing.
But I just want to compliment all of you, as I think that this budget is very reflective of the problems that we saw, and we are addressing it and putting our money where our mouth is. So I appreciate it all. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. And CFO Erickson also shared at our administrative meeting a process that we've worked on and we're developing so that we're looking at how do we move away from the ESSER spending in a way that's just as thoughtful. How do we look at return on investment? How do we plan ahead and be very, very thoughtful around where we'll need, because by the end of December, we're going to have some really serious thought about what is our financial reality for the coming year. And so we're backwards designing from that point, at the point at which we'll need to be, so that we can be well prepared for that. And I appreciate CFO Erickson worked with our administrative team on that day before yesterday, our admin.
That's good. I just want to segue onto that. So if I look at this in order to balance this budget, we're spending $4 million of ESSER funds.
Yep.
Plus some you said planned spending on the fund balance.
Yep, so 400,000 of some of our restricted fund balances, including LTFM, including some of our medical assistance. We have some specific ones that have some funds in them right now that we'll spend out.
Okay, so if everything remains the same.
Yep.
Next year, we will be 4 million in
Yes.
the hole.
Yep.
So everything's not going to stay the same.
That's right.
But that's what I think. Okay, yeah.
I often joke with our administrative team that every time I say, if I had $1 for every time I said, we're running out of money in a year, and really being thoughtful about it. And I know Superintendent Vegas gets to collaborate with superintendents across the state in different meetings, and you probably saw and read in the news that there are districts who are doing reductions now, even though they have ESSER spending, even though they have ESSER dollars, because they chose not to embed that into their operating budget and they're using it for one-time costs. We are very fortunate, and I know in our very first meeting, we didn't get to spend a lot of time talking about our ESSER investment and contributions versus other districts similar in size to us, but we're receiving a lot more than, say, a Stillwater or a St. Cloud because of our free and reduced lunch and how they use the title application and the title calculations to calculate how much ESSER we received. The ESSER 3, for example, that we're getting $20 million, Stillwater's getting 5. So we got $15 million more, even though that school district is almost identical in size to us, but because of their calculation and how they received funds. So we were very, very fortunate in this district, and we made that commitment early in fiscal year 21 that we wanted to be able to maintain the current services we had, because we've been in a budget deficit mode since I arrived in the district, and we decided as a team that we wanted, while we had ESSER funds, to kind of keep one thing maybe fairly stable, but knowing coming forward that we were gonna have to find our way to phase ourselves out of that. So there will be, we're gonna have the strategic plan coming up, we're gonna have other information from our community, working with our teaching and learning teams as we think about curriculum, as we think about blended learning. There's gonna be a lot of different pieces that we're gonna need to think about as we keep moving forward. So I really think it's gonna be a great opportunity to have some good discussions, and it can be okay. It's not gonna, but it's just gonna have to be very planful and very intentional as we walk through what those pieces are. And I know that I remember saying in the meeting just the other day, for education everywhere, there is so much more need than we have resources for. There will never be enough resources to do everything that our students need, and the onus is on us to prioritize. And thank you, Member Eater, for commenting that I think we did spend a lot of time talking through what was important, and I think that's a testament to the leadership of all of our departments who really came forward and said, here's what we need to do. This was truly a collaborative effort. We spoke with all of our building leaders. Our department budgets are fairly stable from year to year at this time, and we'll have some important discussions, especially related to curriculum. We've got some big ticket subject areas that are coming up in the next 5 years that are going to be on the review cycle, and depending on tapping that in with blended learning or our digital learning, how we spend those dollars is going to be really critical. So if we're phasing away from, say, textbooks into more digital education, it's not necessarily cheaper. Those licenses are still expensive just because you're reading it on a screen versus reading it in a textbook. So we're still going to have a lot of investments, and I know that those teams are working really hard to think about what that means moving forward. So I'm just going to press pause to see if there's any other final questions. I do welcome any further questions before Tuesday. I know Member Oswald was not able to be here tonight. I told her as soon as she felt better that I would do a review with her, although maybe she'll watch this and be very excited about this. And so I'm talking to you, Member Oswald, in case you watch.
As an update, she is out of her surgery,
Oh.
and she's doing reasonably well.
Great. So I'll just press pause if there's any other
final questions, and I just want to thank you all for allowing us the opportunity over the past 2 months to be able to visit with you on a regular basis. I'd spend every week with you for 2 hours and talk about the budget if I could. I mean, I think it's so important, but really the work of the district and the teams here that are working really hard, and especially our finance team, I couldn't do it without Simone, and all the work that we do, and her team, and Assistant Superintendent Bonds and all of his team members who work really, really hard, because we're trying to just carry us through for one more year before we have these big important conversations. And obviously Superintendent Magus has taken the strategic planning very seriously, because that's what's going to come out of what we're doing now to adjust what we're going to be thinking about moving forward. I appreciate all the work that has been done, but I very much look forward to the opportunity of seeing where do we reprioritize? If we do, are we on the right path, or are there some things we're gonna discover that are gonna say, you know, like Ice Cream Fridays? I'm really hoping that somebody put that in the strategic plan, because I think that would be perfect. But if that doesn't make the cut, I really look forward to the opportunity for us to adjust and move forward. And the budget can be a moving target, but I think we've shown a lot of creativity, but also some responsibility to make sure that we're moving in the right direction fiscally, and I'm really proud of the district, so thank you.
And likewise, CFO Erickson, thank you for all the work that's gone behind this, into this. Your facilitation has been impeccable and much appreciated, and I know it's recognized by us as a team and us as a district, and even statewide, people call Kathy for answers on a lot of things. Tomorrow morning as well, we have there's a 7:30 ISD MDE meeting on use of the federal funds from the COVID, so we're going to be taking a look at that as well. So getting ideas from other districts as we move forward.
So-
But thank you, Kathy.
Is 4 million about 50 people, 50 new students? We get 50 new students in our
Yes.
district?
Yep.
We would have,
Think about $8,000 a student, so that would be great.
So thus the bus ramp.
bus wrap, and, you know, there's some new housing developments.
I know, I'm gonna go
Bringing in
knock
new
my neighbor and say,
Celebrating our schools.
every one of you have one more kid.
I am done.
And then cut to the night out. No,
We'll babysit.
Every initiative works.
Or asking our DNT to allow us to write a op-ed that shares that, you know, we've got these new programs for summer and all of that.
Absolutely.
And I really wish we could work with MDE to, somehow we've got to, I mean, this is not just this type of year staff shortage in our summer programming. It has been not as severe. So we've got, you know, I'm thinking of like there's floating nurses that come from other areas, or are there ways we can allow our college education majors or get them to start their teaching career because they just graduated in the spring, now in a summer program? I don't know, that's hard. Teaching in the summer setting is a hard start for a brand new teacher, but somehow if we could encourage that type of employment, that would be great. Or I do know though that we are, you know, not all communities around our Duluth area offer a summer program, so those teachers that are teaching in other surrounding districts, if there's a way we can visit with them and go into their schools with employment information in March and April to encourage those districts that don't offer summer school to have those teachers come and teach in our district.
You're spot on, and we also increased our salary
Yeah, we did,
for
yeah.
Summer school teachers and others, and so we're trying to be,
Yeah.
be more competitive. We're trying to make it more attractive, and we're trying to, just figure out a way to, do whatever we can to convince staff to take on these
I
opportunities.
know, yeah, because they know our kids well.
Yeah, they know our kids well. But you're right. If there's other ways the university can help us with some quick or licensures or some waivers for who can be in front of students. And
Or could we encourage our staff to take a position and work with the students they already know, but have a student teacher in the summer? We always, I love working with student teachers. If there's a way we could pay a small stipend for our student teachers, our education majors at our colleges to come in and do, we would call it student teaching. Maybe they'd get some credits from the university, but it wouldn't be their official student teaching. But having that student teacher work with our already veteran teachers might be an incentive to teach in the summer, knowing they've got that support.
Yeah, and we're about to add some support to
Those classrooms.
to actually do that,
Yeah.
to do that thinking, to start partnering, to start figuring out like how can we spend these resources. I want us to be persons that I don't want to give back anything to the state,
Yeah.
right? I want to spend every dollar, our kids can use it, and we can figure out a way to do it. So even if it's, again, increasing partnerships that currently exist. So maybe we partner with organizations who have the staff, who have the abilities, and then we partner with them to provide the services for our students, whether it's enrichment or targeted services. Even if we can't do it as a district, we still can explore all of those options. I think that exists as well, and providing our own opportunities too within house, because it is better in house because we know our kids, it's our curriculum, we know their needs and what we're striving to get them to reach. But if we need to partner, then that's a good plan as well. That's the next best plan. So we just have to keep exploring. But they're also struggling with staffing as well.
Yeah.
Everybody is.
Because we had conversations on this, and I don't know what the requirements are by the state or whatever, but on this, on structuring the workday and the work week for summer school staff. Because you might find some would be interested if they could do every other day, let's say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday instead. Because I think in the past it was Monday through Thursday, correct?
That is correct.
And mornings only. Is that right?
In the past, they had different models.
Well, so, it's just finding that workday, that's the sweet spot too, to maybe attract people and looking at and have those conversations with the executive. There's gotta be some alternative programs or scheduling out there that might attract some more of our own staff.
Agreed.
I think this is all very important conversation. Interesting that you should note that. I was reading district administration, or there's a district administrator journal that I was reading an article just today about different models of staffing that included taking student teachers and putting them into the mix where they're splitting up the students in a different way. I know it's not the way we've always done things, but this was a partnership with University of, or it was Arizona State University, but we have to continue to look at what is the horizon of what are the best things that people are doing related to staffing, because almost every journal I'm reading, it's about, and I hate to say it, it's about educator burnout, challenges with morale, and challenges with staffing. Those are significant issues, and I want us to not be following the pack on what we do. We need to be looking at what the forerunners are doing and be innovative in the way we work together. And the work with our DFT is going to be important in doing that. Anthony and I are meeting with the DFT tomorrow for a planning meeting for lunch as we continue to do some additional planning related to our labor management processes to make sure that those are as strong as possible too, because that has positive impact. So thank you for tonight's work. Appreciate it.
Yay, good job.